The stones of the red keep bled night and salt, and the breath of the Blackwater came in under doors like a thin, chill cat. Arya could taste tar in the air and old smoke and, beneath it, something metallic, as if the very castle's veins ran with rust. The secret stairs pinched close so that the shoulders of a small serving girl brushed both walls, and the torches guttered in their brackets with a weary hiss, as if even fire was cautious here. She counted steps without meaning to. Counting kept her soft, kept her small, the way the kindly man had taught her in Bravos when she learned to be a whisper inside her own bones. 91 steps from the postern to the break in the passage where stones sweated and a hairline crack spidered up into darkness. 39 more to the narrow door whose hinges were filed smooth and kissed with tallow. 7 heartbeats to listen for the heavy scrape of a single armored boot. The sound did not come. The mountain did not pace here. He paced where men could see him and fear would gather like fog around his greaves. A drip struck her wrist. She wiped it with the back of her hand and tasted lime. The castle had its humors like a body. In Winterfell the drafts were honest. Pine and snow and smoke and the faint musk of old wolves. But here the air remembered every whisper. Here the mortar held stories, and the stones had learned to lie. The face was a good one for these halls. A girl who had kept her head down all her life, with a dusting of freckles across a thin nose and a mouth that had been taught to press itself shut. Arya had sewn it softly to herself in a niche behind the buttery, while late-rising lords still picked meat from their teeth. The leather bag with its faces had been lighter each year, yet heavier with remembering. When she drew this one on, she had thought not of the nameless girl but of the shape of silence, of being beneath notice. She moved like a reflection in a wine cup. When she reached the service door that opened on the lower gallery of the Queen's new hall, she stopped to listen again. She heard the whisper of fabric, the sharp kiss of crystal on wood, the low, dry rasp of Qyburn's voice. "The bells are to be left alone," he was saying, the words as careful as the hands that had rebuilt a dead giant. "We will not have the city thinking you afraid." "I am not afraid," Cersei said. Her voice had been golden once, Arya supposed. It sounded now like light striking coins, a hard glittering. "Let them think. They will think what I tell them. Let them sleep. Let them wake to my banners." A pause, a slight slosh of wine. "Leave me." Arya slid the door and flowed into shadow behind a bank of carved screens where lions chased each other to exhaustion through vines. The painted map took up the hall's floor, the green and ochre of Westeros under the Queen's hem. Maids had been sent away. The last of the day's council had trickled out like cold gravy. Cersei stood where the neck narrowed, wine in hand, eyes on the dark windows that faced the Black Sea. She wore a brooch shaped like her father's pride, and the candlelight drew out the bruise yellow in it. She was taller than Arya had imagined when she had whispered the name in winter darks years ago. Taller and more tired. Qyburn withdrew with the soft scuff of a scholar who had learned to be subservient. His cloak made a small sound as it turned. He passed within 2 paces of the screens. Arya kept her breath a leaf on still water. He did not see the leaf. The door closed behind him without complaint. Cersei tipped the wine to her lips, eyes still on darkness. "When I was a girl," she said to the windows, which were not listening, "I thought the world was smaller. It was the size of this city, the size of my father's table. It is an ugly truth that it is much larger, too large for anyone to rule without breaking." She smiled into her cup. "But I am what I am." A sound stirred in Arya that was not quite laughter and not quite pity. She let it pass. She adjusted the weight of the tray on her hands, though the tray was only air. She let the face set deeper on her, the girl with freckles and pressed lips, and came out from behind the screens with a small curtsy as if she had always been there. "My queen," she said, making the girl's voice soft, a bit hoarse with steam and kitchen fires. "The flagon is refreshed. Fresh fruit as well, oranges from Dorne." "Leave it," Cersei said, barely glancing, the way one looks at a chair one expects to hold. Her eyes returned to the window and its sheen of night. "And go." Arya went, far enough to set down nothing on a nothing table, then returned, small, capable, invisible. The catspaw dagger lay flat against her forearm under the sleeve. It warmed to her like a remembered vow. Her heartbeat set up a deliberate count again, unbidden. 1 for Joffrey, 1 for Meryn, 1 for the Tickler, 1 for the Hound, if the gods had willed it, 1 for Walder Frey, 1 for every Lannister who had smiled while Winterfell burned. Cersei had been there from the beginning, the name that tasted of iron and lemon peel. "Will there be anything else?" the small voice asked. Her feet set themselves on the painted north, and she felt the pull of it under the thin soles of a borrowed pair of shoes. The ghost of Godswood earth, of hard snow squeaking with cold. Cersei turned. Her eyes were green and clever, and tired and cruel. "You are new," she said, which could have been the beginning of a different life for both of them if the world were not the shape that it was. "Who took my cup yesterday? I dislike change." Arya lowered her eyes. The face moved as if embarrassed. "Melara, my queen." "Melara," Cersei said. If there was a flinch in her, it was buried deep under the years and the armor of certainty. The name was just a shape passing through her throat. "Very well." Her attention slid away like a cat's. "Tell the kitchens, no more boar pie. I have wearied of it. Something clean." "Yes, my queen." Arya stepped closer. The map showed the fingers beneath her and the veils painted mountains. She smelled the wine, a deep red with a lazy acidity that clung to the tongue. A curl of Cersei's hair had fallen loose over her ear. It made her look younger, but only in the way ruins sometimes looked like they might still be houses. The candle behind her sketched Cersei's profile in gold. The strong nose, the ruling mouth. Arya thought of a wolf at the edge of trees watching a field. The knife thought nothing, simply was. "Now," Cersei said to the window again. "If the dragon girl thinks to." Arya's left hand rose with a napkin, an ordinary motion. Her right hand crossed the small, dark space the way a word crosses a mouth. The dagger's point went in below the ear where bone is thin and kings are mortal. Cersei's eyes flew wide. A sound escaped her that might have been surprise or a beginning of a word no one would hear. Arya's palm covered her mouth, and the mouth was soft. The fluttering of Cersei's pulse against Arya's wrist was like a trapped swallow. "Vala Morgulus," Arya breathed, and the face did not speak. And the girl did not breathe for a whole 2 counts as if to honor the sentence. The knife slid out slick with a thread of life and went in again, quick and sure, where a healer would not, where a killer must. Cersei's knees bent as if to curtsy to someone who had finally come. Arya lowered her to the painted map, to the place of the crownlands, because there was a small, ungentle symmetry in it that satisfied nothing and everything. The wine glass tipped and rolled, leaking a red arc that spanned the Stormlands to Dorne. Candle guttered. Cersei's eyes, so bright, dimmed by candlelight degrees. Her lashes quivered once, like a wing cutting air, and stopped. The castle sighed as if a pressure had released in it or had just begun. The room held its breath afterward because rooms learn their masters. The face on Arya itched as if it had learned something, too. She wiped the blade on the hem of her plain dress. The cloth took the blood and darkened greedily. Arya placed the napkin by the empty glass because that was the kind of detail that would make a certain kind of man think this was only a private despair. She thought of leaving a sign, a wolf scratched small in wax, but signs are for men who need their names known. She had needed that once. She needed it less now. She crossed to the screens. The door beyond them remembered not to creak. In the corridor, the air tasted of colder stone. Down the gallery, beyond a curve and the watch of a pair of empty suits of armor, she could hear the slow, unlovely stride of something heavy descending a stair, and the smaller rustle of Qyburn's robes hurrying to meet it. Monsters come when they are called. They had always come for Cersei. They would come too late. Arya moved like water through familiar rocks. The stair that had brought her up would take her down and away. She made herself smaller, a cup set on a shelf where no one looked, and she went, and the catspaw sat again on her forearm, and the stones that bled salt pretended she had never passed. Outside, the sea breathed and the city slept with one eye open. The wind from the Blackwater traced the alleys with cold fingers. Far below, a bell on some fisher's skiff knocked its tongue twice against its iron mouth. Only that, and then silence again, while in a high hall a golden woman lay very still upon a painted world, and the first fly of night found her. By the time the sky had turned the color of iron filings and stale milk, the rumor had already darted from eve to eve like a sparrow avoiding cats. It wore a dozen faces. The queen had fainted. The queen had flown. The queen had taken a ship in the night with a hull stuffed with gold. The queen had given birth to a snake, bitten and bled out. Men who slept on their steps under blankets that smelled of old rain woke and blinked and rolled the rumor around like a stone in a mouth to feel its shape. Women with pails murmured it to one another at wells where the water had not decided yet whether it wanted to be daylight. A ragpicker laughed and coughed and spat once onto the cobbles and said, "I am a dragon." Arya kept to the edges, shedding one skin for another like a snake that remembered both. The freckled girl was not so useful in the light, not with gold cloaks already cracking their knuckles and their cudgels and what passed for their minds. In an alley behind a potter's shop, she softened another face with water from a sycamore-rooted cistern, pressed it to herself with her palms and that quiet prayer that was not a prayer, and breathed in mercy. Mercy had a smudge on her cheek and a soft mouth and a way of looking up through lashes that made people think they knew her. Mercy could thread flea-bottom like a needle through a ripped seam. The first file of gold cloaks rattled past with their armor unpolished and their eyes a bit too bright. Their sergeant bellowed for the lower gates to be watched, their words stumbling over each other. No one leaves until what was unclear, until the world returned to a shape they understood. Yes, Arya looked at their boots, at the slop of last night's rain and swill and the mucus sheen where the street dipped. One man had a lace broke and kept stepping on it. The city told you who it was if you had time to listen. Bread? Mercy? A boy asked her, pale as old wood under grime. He had hair that might have been yellow once, and he hugged the loaf to himself as if the crust could keep the morning out. The lady at the ovens said you sometimes. She gave him 2 coppers and took a heel in return because that is how you do kindness in places that punish the unbalanced scale. The bread was dense, a bit sour, and steam curled from its heart in a tired scroll. She ate and walked and kept her shoulders loose, her head ducked, the world a series of corners and light, each asking a different answer. The bells did not ring. A city listens to itself the way a body does. It knows when a silence is a bruise. On the climb toward the street of the sisters, a woman in good wool with a fur collar, too hot for the morning, grabbed at Arya's sleeve without seeing her. "My cousin's husband is in the household," she said to the air. "They say she fell. They say she, oh gods, not that. Not like..." Her eyes followed the wall line up toward where the keep shouldered the sky. "Where are the bells? Why don't they?" A squad of red keep men, Qyburn's new breed, the ones who had learned to step around a corpse without apology, pushed through the market. Their captain was a narrow man whose beard obeyed strict lines. His mouth did not. "The gates," he was saying to a younger officer. "And the coppersmiths. Seal the smiths. I want no nails sold, no bar iron. If that fishwife opens her mouth again, bind it. Where is the maester? Where is..." More rumor came in small, breathless clots. The queen had been found sleeping on a painting like a child after wine. The queen had cut her thumb on a glass and bled a river down the Mander. The queen had died. The queen had died. The queen had... The words would not settle. They flew and pecked and circled, smelling blood and not knowing who was carrion. Arya eased past a stall of eels, the slick bodies twisting slowly in their tub. A man with a scar like a sideways tear across his cheek spread a cloth of knives with the care of a priest making offerings. "Good steel," he told the street. "Good edge. For honest work." He met her eyes by chance, and she let Mercy look away the way a girl would, a little flustered, a little pleased to be noticed, and then she was gone again down the seam where the wall leaned and the clay flaked like old skin. She thought of the room where a fly had begun its pilgrimage. She thought of light failing in green eyes. The thoughts did not make victory in her throat. They were a stone dropping and disappearing. At a corner where the cobbles tilted and showed their tongues, a knot of folk had formed around a boy hardly older than Bran had been when he climbed everything that stood still. He had a throat like a pipe, and he used it. "The lioness is dead," he crowed. "Hear me, hear me. The lioness is dead. The wolf bit her in the dark. The bells won't ring because lions don't toll their own doom." He hopped onto a crate and bowed, and the laugh that burst from the crowd was sharp as glass. Even fear likes to grin when it can. A gold cloak cuffed the boy down. The boy bounced up and grinned blood, red as a berry on his lower lip. "Ring your own heads." He spat at them and tore away on legs more used to this calculus than theirs. The men chased him, boots slipping in eel water, curses sliding, cudgels making promises. Arya slid with the eddies of it all. She could leave if she wished. There were a dozen posterns and 3 drains she would trust with her bones and the rest of her. She had made the shape of leaving before she entered. Still, she did not put her feet on the road yet. There is a part of the heart that waits to see what the morning becomes of the thing you did in the night. Near the hook, the wind came sharper, salt with intent. She saw ships like blunt knives, their masts clicking quietly together. She bought 2 small oranges because Cersei had said the word, because sometimes it is right to place something bright on the tongue after darkness. The fruit bled sweet and bitter both when she bit, and the oils on her fingers cut the stink of the fish market. By the time the sun wrestled itself past a low scrim of cloud and admitted it was truly day, the upper city had begun to bristle. The Kingsguard, what remained of them now that the white had yellowed to ivory with compromise, stood at gates. Qyburn's men spread like ants troubled at a nest. Somewhere, "Hi!" a scream started when someone opened a door. Arya watched a wave travel through the line of gold cloaks on the lane of the lantern makers. They looked up toward the keep as if seeing it new, and one man crossed himself with a quick, guilty hand as if such wards worked on politics. She turned her face toward the lower gates then, because enough was enough, and because news would fly much faster than she could, and there were other storms to measure, other skins to test for leaks. The last she saw of the upper city that morning was a flare of red silk at a balcony, whipped once by a wind that had decided to blow, and then falling still, dead weight in sunshine. Morning or washing left untended. Either way, the city had chosen its symbols. On the road that curved past the September of the last vigil, 7 spires like thin fingers pushing at a pale sky, an old woman took Arya's hand without asking and pressed a sprig of dried lavender into her palm. "For mercy," she said. Her eyes were cataract milk. "It will not sweeten what's rotting, but it tells you your own hands from a stranger's." She shuffled away before Arya could answer. The lavender scratched her lifeline and made a small honest scent that did not belong to power. At the gate of the King's Tower, 2 men argued about whether to bar the way. "Orders," said the one with the squared beard, and he liked the word, savored it. "Everything is to be held. No one leaves until we have ourselves by the throat." The other muttered and spat and looked tired down to his nails. He waved Mercy through because Mercy had mastered the small art of not existing while borrowing all the advantages of existence. Beyond them, the road ran like a scar toward the river and the world, the sound of gulls beginning their ugly day loud as laughter. Arya did not look back when she crossed the threshold. She kept her eyes on the weeping willow's shadow that lay across the dust like lace and stepped through it, and the shadow broke and fell back into the tree. She slipped the dried lavender behind her ear because the old woman had wanted something for the morning besides rumor. At the first bend, she let Mercy's face loosen from hers and folded it carefully away. The freckled girl went after, soft and obedient. Under both, Arya Stark breathed once properly, and the air came cold and honest. Tasted of the road. It tasted, faintly, of snow remembered at the height of summer. The parchment was stiff with cold, and the wolf's head seal had cracked in the opening. The words on it were a sober hands and said less than they meant. Sansa read them twice without moving her lips, and then once more with her thumb stroking the margin where a jot of ink had bled. The hall breathed with her, a low rumble of men and the pop of the fire, and, under those, the bones of Winterfell reminding everyone present who had owned this hall before any of them had discovered words. "Say it plain," Lord Glover grunted at last, impatience his only soft thing. "We are not crows. We don't peck meanings out of pretty scratches." Sansa lifted her eyes. She felt the weight of the mantle over her shoulders. Its wolf fur heavy with snowmelt that had refrozen and been broken off and refrozen again a dozen times in the long month. She thought of her father's hand warm and steady at her back. She thought of her mother's palms, long-fingered and strong. "Cersei Lannister is dead," she said. The words were not a sword thrust. They were a door opening onto a winter field. Silence ran for 3 heartbeats and then found its edges. A few men made signs to the old gods. One spat and muttered that spitting would freeze on the stones tonight. Davos Seaworth, who had made honesty into a weapon and a habit, leaned his elbows on the table and put his salt-shaker voice quietly into the room. How dead? And who by? He had learned, Sansa thought, how stories took fire. "The Raven doesn't say," she said. "It did. If you were a Stark and had kept one ear always turned toward your sister's old darkness." The wording, the lack of flourish, the precision of the time, the small detail about the overturned glass, was Arya's manner as surely as the tightness of a stitch in a well-sewn cloak was hers. Sansa felt a quick ache, sharp as a scalpel, that was pride and fear together. But the city is holding its breath. The bells have not rung. Someone should have rung them. An Umber boy blurted, too loud. His ears went red when heads turned. If the queen is, well, someone should say so." "They will," Jon said, speaking for the first time, and the hall's attentions gathered themselves around him without being told to. His hair had grown out ragged after battles that had no patience for mirrors. He stood near the fire as if it might be a gate he would have to take quickly if the dead walked through the door. Ghosts' eyes, old as frost, watch the men who watch Jon. When they decide whose bells they are. The city does not ring for queens so much as for itself. Bran's eyes had gone somewhere far, or close in a way the rest of them could not follow. Sansa had learned not to ask in front of a hall. In private, sometimes he would name small things that had not happened yet in the tone of weather. "The wind changes at dawn," he said softly, and then, "A fly landed on green paint." "I know who did it," Arya had once told Sansa, a lifetime ago, in a Winterfell corridor smelling of rushes and puppy. There had been a list and a girl who practiced death with sticks. Sansa felt the shape of that memory in the bones of the hall as surely as she felt the shape of her own breath. She let none of it reach her face. Queens learned masks as surely as any assassin. "We have 2 wars, she said. "We have had 2 wars for longer than men admit. One in songs and one in the wind. The dead look south as surely as any army. The queen's death changes the map." She looked down at the table's battered boards. She saw, in her mind, the painted floor in King's Landing she had stood upon once, when she was very young and did not understand that maps were wishes. "We can make of it a noose or a road." Lord Glover's fist found the table, not in anger but to stake a claim. "The lions," he said. "Old debts, old blood. You won't find a man here who'd object to paying them back with interest." Murmurs thrummed like a big cat purring when it thinks it hears a mouse. Sansa let the sound rise and ebb. She knew how to ride a room now. She had learned from men who thought themselves her teachers. "We can kill them," she said. "We can send men in little companies to take red cloaks on roads and at doorways. We can sack their houses. The songs would be satisfying for a little while." She lifted the parchment again. "Or we can cut the knot a different way." Davos's head tipped, curious as a gull. "Girl." He had called her my lady from the first. Girl was an old man's lapse when thought ran ahead of formality. His eyes were respectful. "Outlawry," Sansa said. The word rolled from a deep chamber of memory, where old strong things were kept. Ban and exile, not of one man, of a name. She looked around the table and made herself see each man so they would feel seen and then feel owned. For what they have been and done. From the murder of children to the breaking of oaths to the burning of our home, we name House Lannister outcast from the realm. Not one man, the line. Every man who calls himself lion wears that mane under pain of death. No trade with them. No bread. No guest right. If they take food, the food turns to ash in the mouths of those who gave it. If they take shelter, the roof becomes a gallows. We make it a sin to succor them. We drive them not into graves but into the wilderness, where they may learn what it is to depend upon mercy and find it scarce. A few men made that puffing sound northerners made when a hard thing pleased them. Others frowned. Words, someone muttered, and Sansa saw who by the set of the shoulders. Words don't stop a sword, or pay for a burned winter store. Words let men draw swords together, Jon said. We've seen what happens when every house pays its own debts in its own manner. It becomes flaying for some and starvation for others, and then there is no field left to sow. He looked at Sansa then, and the look was an old road that had carried them both through worse. You will need more than Winterfell for this. I know it, she said. She looked to Lord Royce's proxy in his bronze-embossed cloak, to the Manderleys with their whale pins, to Lyanna Mormont's cousin who had her bear's jaw and no patience for anything but survival. We call a council here, not in King's Landing. The South is a nest set afire, and the smoke is its own army. Let the realm come north if it wishes order. Those who will not come, we will write to them. We will name the exile and offer terms for those who cannot let go of lion kin. They may keep blood but not banners. Any Lannister who renounces his name may take another. Mothers, wives, a true name of work and live. Those who stay lions will be hunted by law, not by sport. A soft death, growled a man who had lost 2 sons on the Green Fork and had not found any replacement weight in his arms sufficient to balance that. Too soft. Death is easy, Davos said before Sansa could. His eyes were on the fire like an old sailor reading tides. I have seen men learn less from it than from a cut rope and a long swim. Make a man live without his name, without his gold buying him bread? Make him show his worth from scratch? To some, that is kinder than they deserve. To others, it will make something new where we keep making the old. Bran's voice then, mild and distant. If you burn a field to kill one weed, you don't get the field back next spring. He blinked slowly. There's frost tonight. Send ravens, Sansa said. She tapped the scroll against her palm with quiet emphasis. To the Vale, to White Harbor, to the Trident, to Dragonstone. Her eyes found Jon's. The last word tasted of smoke and salt and a woman who had walked through fire and built herself back out of the heat. Tell them the North calls for exile where the South would call for spectacle. Tell them the bells didn't ring because the city didn't know who it belonged to for an hour. Offer them something that belongs to all of us. A way to live after we've taken our hands from each other's throats. Ghost breathed. A slow wolf wind. Jon nodded, not as a king would nod but as a man does who understands the size of a burden. I'll write, he said, and I'll send men with stout backs, not just words. The dead don't wait while we finish old business. But if we can make fewer enemies while we meet them. Sansa felt the hall ease, almost invisibly. It is a craft, she thought, to make a future that men can taste. She closed her hand around the parchment's edge until the crackle spoke in her palm, and she wondered where Arya was just then, whether the road under her sister's boots was dust or mud or stone, whether the air she breathed smelled of pine yet, whether the shape of her mouth when she was satisfied had changed. Outside, snow took a patient bite from the world and chewed. Inside, the hall made itself ready for letters and for war and for a kind of peace that would not fit easily into songs. They did not touch her at first. Even the air refused, standing back as if it could be accused. Qyburn's breath came in narrow threads, silk drawn from a spider's gut. Steady because he made it so. The old maester, the unmester, had taught himself where to put fear. A little box made of bone inside his chest, lined with something that did not take fire. He had survived larger ruins than a queen. The candle behind her was bent as if it had tried to look away. The map's paint had a sheen like fish skin. He noted the angle of the glass where it had fallen, the arc traced by the wine, the precise lack of struggle in the way her hair lay. The wound's mouth was clean and sure, not the ragged earnestness of panic. Professional. He thought of a shadow with hands. He thought of a little man with a boldness that ran wild when unobserved. No, the height was wrong, the angle. This had been done by someone in arm's length who moved like water. His face did not move. Inside him, quiet conclusions were being written in little letters. "Sire," he said without turning his head, because that was how one spoke to mountains that walked. "Close the doors, gently, and send for Captain Strickland. Send for the captains of the city watch. Send no bells," he breathed.
No bells.
The doors closed. The draft ceased and the room found its weight again. Sir Robert Strong, Gregor's corpse made obedient, the name of velvet cloth thrown over but not obscuring a horror, stood where Qyburn had placed him. He was very still, a malign statue, and the candles loathed him as flame loathes a damp cave. When Strickland came, his face had the polished calm of a man who had practiced it in smaller rooms. It cracked on the third step into the hall when he saw the thing he had been hired to keep alive because it would pay him. "Gods," he breathed, but not the way a man prays. It was the way a man trips over a word he had thought he knew. Qyburn rose like a reed drawn through water. "You are to keep your men close," he said. "No one in or out of the Red Keep. The city must believe there is a queen somewhere in these walls who gives orders even now." He let that rest. Strickland swallowed. "We will announce morning when I have composed its shape. For now, we require silence. The bells would give us a story we cannot control." "A story," Strickland said, hauling at composure. "And the culprit?" Qyburn folded the black veil. He did not place it on Cersei's face. She had hated veils. "If the murderer declared himself, I did not hear him. There are possibilities." He crossed to the window and glanced through its narrow slit at the upper bailey and the courtyard beyond, where men moved like pieces across a board whose rules had changed without telling them. "Go to the gates," he said. "Put your banners up. The city must see coin in order and order in coin." Strickland hesitated. Gold Company veterans had a nose for when a contract had begun to rot. "Our pay." Qyburn turned his head with polite interest. "Your pay has been arranged. The Queen's hand assured me the crown was solvent." Strickland did not miss the gloss laid over a graze. He bowed a hair too shallow and withdrew. When he was gone, Qyburn's breath left him once, like a candle coughing before it commits to burning. He knelt again, and now he placed the veil, smoothing it over Cersei's brows. His fingers were deft. It lay as if sewn there. "I told you," he murmured, as one remarks to a confidant who will not hear and was not one even when alive, "that matters left to chance are matters left to enemies. You left this to chance." He raised his eyes to the mountain. "Carry her to her chamber," he said. "Gently." The thing took her weight as if picking up a bundle of wheat. Qyburn watched how the dead hold the dead. He filed it away. He would write a proclamation before noon. He would name a regency. His own would be unpalatable even to the desperate. Better a council with him as its needle and thread. He would point a finger. There were many directions to point. Tyrion Lannister was alive and had a face that would fit a story men liked to tell. The city would swallow that tale like a sweet with poison under sugar. Meanwhile, he would seal stairs and search for a shadow. Shadows had weight if you knew where to place the scale. When he was alone, he permitted himself one glance at the place on the map where Cersei's blood had traveled. A red curve over Dorne. The irony made a small, dry click in his head. He smiled without humor and went to fetch parchment sharpened to a spear point. The road behaved as if it had not heard. It had been a road when the Undulls came, when kings with better songs and worse teeth than any now alive rode north on horses with names. It received Arya the way it received light or a wheel rut or a boot with a loose heel, without preference. That was a politeness she appreciated. She put miles behind her like beads on a string. Mercy had gone to her bag. The freckled girl lay sleeping on leather. Arya's own face looked back from a puddle when the wind failed and let the world go still, and she studied it without favor. Her mouth had learned to take satisfaction like a man takes his ale, in a long pull, then with a flat palm to the table. She thought of the moment when Cersei's eyes had realized that the world had a shape other than the one she had made. There had been no triumph in her, not in the shape she would have recognized as the child who watched her father die. There had only been weight. She ate what road gave. Turnips roasted in ash taste better than you expect if you are already hungry. A man going south with a wagon of coppiced poles traded her 2 hard apples for a smile that was not too dear. At night she kept the fire no higher than her cupped hand, and sometimes not at all, because she had learned that cold keeps you sharp and smoke tells too many tales. On the 3rd morning, with frost still a fine powder on the ditch grass, she found a thing that was both omen and household scene. A tattered 7-pointed star hung from a leaning post outside a little sept that had lost its roof one autumn to men who didn't care for roofs. 2 women had made a dwelling from what remained. They had stretched sailcloth over the nave and coaxed a garden into the bones of the transept, kale and carrots rising as if faith could be eaten. 1 woman pounded grain with a rhythm older than prayer. The other was mending fishing net with hands that had learned finesse the hard way. Bread? The net mender said, a question and a measurement both. Her eyes were not suspicious, only cautious the way people become when the world has trained caution into their sleep. Arya handed her a copper and the lavender sprig with the quickness that kept pity from being pity. For your net, she said, in case fish have noses and like their meals scented. The woman laughed, a sound like dry sticks but fond. Noses they have, she said. She pressed a warm, dense loaf into Arya's hands. It's the liking that's in doubt. She nodded toward the road. They say a queen died. They say many things, Arya said. She tore off a piece and ate it hot, the steam making the morning smell like wheat. They say the dead are walking. The grain pounder paused. Her pestle hovered. The silence around the 3 of them had a different texture than mere quiet. We have seen fog that did not behave, she said at last. And once a bird fell dead from the sky and lay with its eyes open all night. Arya finished the bread and licked her thumb because hunger makes you honest. Go west, she said, or go east, but go. Don't be here when fog begins to think. They watched her a moment longer as if wishing to ask what shape the fog would take when it spoke. They did not ask. They had learned enough to know that sometimes the answer is the same as a curse. Be gone by dawn. She left them with their kale and their roofless faith and the dry click of the pestle beginning again. On the next stretch of road, a gallows stood with its ropes like long, abandoned questions. Crows rose when she passed, irritable at being disturbed from breakfast. She did not look up. She let the lavender's ghost scent tell her she was still herself and that some old woman somewhere had thought of mercy when she should have thought of coin. Arya's steps made a sentence the road remembered after she had gone. By the 2nd week, she had left the bareness south of the neck and entered the lowland of the Trident where willow and alder and patient water make a different kind of map. A boy with a reed whistle sat on a bridge rail and made 3 notes over and over until they found the shape of a tune. He grinned when she passed and then pretended he had not, for reasons known only to boys and gods. She slept that night in the bole of an old oak and dreamed that she walked through rooms made of wolf's breath where her father's hand was warm on her hair again and her mother's voice came from another room and did not stop. She woke with her hands tight around the dagger and let them relax 1 finger at a time as if unclenching might be a way to summon the past. It was not, but she did it anyway. On the 5th river she forded, the water came cold enough to remind her that the north makes its own decisions. She crossed with her hem tucked and her boots slung around her neck and her teeth bared at the coal so it would not think it had the better of the meeting. At the far bank, wolf tracks pressed the mud where it held its breath. Large. Many. She knelt and laid her palm in one, and it dwarfed her. The hairs lifted at the back of her neck as if at a door opening behind her. She stood and did not call a name because names summon as well as soothe. When the pack came at dusk, they did not come at her. They crossed the rise to her left, flowing like smoke with muscle underneath, silent except for the sound of feet in grass, and at the center of them a wolf large as a mare with eyes like old amber. She did not look direct. You don't do that to queens, wolves, or otherwise. But she shifted her weight so they saw her stance and smelled what she was made of now. The large wolf tossed her head once, disdainful and curious, and the pack went on, and the night closed behind them like a curtain. Arya breathed and let the questions the sight had woken settle into the places they would usefully sharpen. The ravens had begun to look at Sansa as if they knew their work mattered. They hobbled and croaked in their house, impatient with order, and she admired them for it. Anything that could be trained to endure the will of men and still remain itself deserved a place in a song that wasn't a lie. In the solar, Maester Wolken had spread the new writs like a winter of paper. The seal of Winterfell, the direwolf's head, shone from cooling pools of wax in tidy, dangerous circles. Sansa's pen bit down on words with a care that did not blunt their teeth. She had spent a childhood believing words could be woven into a net to catch mercy. She had learned in a Crimson City that words could be swords if you shaped them with a smith's attention. These were swords. "Read it again," she said, and Jon did, the deep set of his voice steady and without adornment. "Hear the will of the assembled lords of the North, the Vale and their sworn allies," he intoned. "For crimes openly committed and secretly contrived, for the slaughter of guests, for the oath-breaking at the Trident and the Trident's descendants, for the burning of the North's crown and hearth, and for the endless levies of coin and blood, we do pronounce House Lannister outlaw and exiled from the peace of the realm. No bread shall be broken with lions, no shelter given, no trade struck. Any man who bears the name and fails to lay it down shall be hunted not as a stag but as a wolf hunts the wolf who eats its own. Any man or woman who renounces the name and takes another, swearing by old gods or new to leave lion's pride behind, shall be offered a place among us or sent to the wall to make his penitence useful. So written under witness of the heart tree and the mother's altar both." "It is too long," Lord Glover grumbled, "because some men believe a thing grown long has had time to weaken. Say the same with fewer words and more threat." "It says we are not what they are," Sansa said without heat. "If you want a world made of only hard things, you end by breaking what you meant to save. We will have a scaffolding, not a bonfire." Davos traced a finger along the last lines, a sailor measuring depths. "The wall's a shadow," he said, "but even a shadow throws shape in noon sun. Put this in the hands of enough men who like their names more than their father's pride, and you may peel the lion before he knows he's skinned." Bran's eyes were somewhere else entirely, beyond the godwood, through the snow entering the air and leaving it again as if undecided. He returned by steps none of them could see. "A bird flew from the Red Keep," he remarked, and Sansa did not ask how he knew. "It carried a lie with a kernel inside it like a seed with poison. They will blame the imp." "Tyrion," Jon said, with the weight of a man who had eaten meals with that name seated across the table and found himself often nourished by humor that floated over bitterness like fat on broth. "Daenerys's hand." "Daenerys will know better," Sansa said, and then she put the thought aside like a cup she could not drink from while she held others full. "Faith in other people's wisdom is a poor foundation," she reminded herself. "Better to build so that even fools find the right footings. We must send men as well as words. Wyman will carry it south by sea. The Vale's riders will carry it along the high roads." She closed her eyes. "We will need a face the South will trust to be fair." "Me," said a voice behind them that had not spoken in a council for 10 days. Jaime Lannister stood at the door with a guard at his shoulder, who looked sorry to be on duty and sorrier to be free. The Kingslayer wore a thick winter cloak which made mock of the too fine lines of a Westerland's cut. His golden hand caught the lantern light and threw it back with offended dignity. He had shaved but poorly. A man grows a beard for penance and then does not know how to put his face in order when the barber returns. The hall's people bristled reflexively. The North knows prey from predator. It takes a moment to decide what to do when a wolf comes in wearing a lion's skin that does not fit. Sansa set down her pen. She had thought this moment would come and had not decided beforehand what it would require of her, because she had learned to let some decisions be made in the mouth. "Speak," she said. He did not incline his head to the title he might once have expected. He walked forward until the warmth from the brazier touched his boots. The scars around his wrist where a true hand had once attached looked colder than the day. He looked at Bran a fraction too long. A wince crossed his face and was tamed. "Name it," he said. "My house is outlawed, so let it be. Name me as well if you please." He spread his left palm. "Or hear me and then name me, if what I say is not enough." Ghost's breath smoked. Jon's face was still, but his eyes moved as if tracking a rider along a ridge. "Say it," Jon said. "I killed the king I was sworn to protect to save the city from burning in wildfire," Jaime said, and fatigue made it sound like a confession told too many times and never believed. "They called me Kingslayer and spat. I bore it. I have done worse things I'm not ashamed of because shame is cheap and penance is dearer." He looked at Sansa, and his mouth tightened in something that did not reach for pity. "Your father looked at me once and weighed me on scales he thought fair. I failed them. I will not ask you to use his." Sansa's throat closed, and she willed it open, because the dead deserve truth more than they deserve tears. "What do you offer?" she asked. "My name," he said promptly, as if he had it ready like coin. "I lay it down." He pulled at the gold-sheathed stump, an angry gesture, then held it quiet. "Not Lannister, not Hill, not any bastard's dress. Jaime, only that. I will wear no lion, swear no lion's oath, take no lion's friendship. I will go where this writ requires and speak it. Men will think me a trick. I have been a trick. I will make them think otherwise with what I do between leaving Winterfell and sleeping." "You ask to be trusted," Lord Glover said, shame prickling his voice like cold because there were moments the old honor demanded a shape and the new world did not supply it. "That's a dear ask from a dear debtor." "No," Jaime said, and a dry humor showed itself and was gone. "I ask to be watched. That, Sansa thought, is a better coin." "Go," she said, and the room drew breath through its teeth. "Go with our writ. You will have 2 riders from the Vale and 2 from White Harbor. If you turn your cloak once between here and the Trident, you will not reach the second village." She looked at Jon, and he gave the smallest of nods, as if the day had placed a stone and now they must build around it instead of through it. "Bran?" she asked, because she had learned to ask winter what spring could not know. Bran's eyes were winter under a low sky. "A man made of old vows is still a man," he said. "Sometimes he can be made new." He blinked. "Do not send him to the Riverlands first." The corners of his mouth twitched, not in humor but as if a wind had touched the snow. "Send him east. The Vale keeps its promises longer than most." Jaime bowed, not to a lady nor a queen, but to an order. "My thanks," he said, and he sounded as if the words had been reintroduced to him after a long convalescence. He turned on his heel and left before any of them had time to make a moment he could not endure. The sea's tongue licked the black steps below Dragonstone with ancient, inhuman patience. Daenerys stood where salt made lace on the stone lip of the hall and let the wind tug at her braids. The dragons were aloft. Their shadows passed over her shoulder like omens that refused to be named. She had thought a city would be below her by now, not a restless sea. She had learned to let plans breathe because the world had a way of sitting on the chest of the best-laid ones and making them wheeze. Tyrion read the letter aloud because words take on different shapes when a friend says them. His mouth shaped Sansa's writ with a care that did not keep his hand from trembling. He did not look at his queen as he spoke House Lannister outlawed. He looked at his own fingers as if they might tell him whether a man could disrobe a name without shedding his skin. Varys listened with his eyes on the waves as if they were saying the same letter in a different tongue. Missandei Icecole hovered and made a small drop of ink on the margin where she had been taking down details for a reply that might find its shape later. She disliked imprecision. She had learned from Daenerys to make the future out of straight lines when possible. When Tyrion finished, the wind remarked upon the silence with a long, salt exhale. Daenerys set her hand on the basalt, steadying herself against a doubt that was more hunger than fear. "Sansa writes with iron," she said. "She is her mother's daughter." She turned. "And this will be difficult for you." Tyrion smiled his crooked smile, which fit him better than any princely version ever had. "On the contrary," he said, then corrected himself with a little bow to honesty. "No, not on the contrary. On the oblique. It is a relief to be told that a thing I have been for years is now a requirement." He folded the parchment, crackled. "I have been Tyrion the Lannister who betrayed his house for reasons both noble and petty. This writ says I may be Tyrion, who is no Lannister. It is clarifying. Grey Worm's eyes did not soften. They were instruments built for use. In the city, he said. They say it was you. Yes, Tyrion said. Of course they do. If I were Qyburn and had a corpse to hide, I would put my knife in my enemy's pocket before I cried, "Stop, thief." He looked toward the map. We can answer that with ravens. Words are arrows, they must fly first to matter. Or we can answer with me. Varys inclined his egg of a head. Your living body is more eloquent than your ink, he murmured. But eloquence is difficult when catapults are in use. We will not tread that road because a whisperer wishes it, Daenerys said, and the steel in her voice made the air around them stand to attention. We have our own war. The dead come. The North asks for a kind of law. We will meet them there with soldiers and a banner that is not made only of fire. She moved to the map. Her hand hovered over the neck. We will go to Winterfell. Tyrion's relief was tempered with the exhaustion of a man who had built many plans and watched too many of them sink. We go to Winterfell, he echoed, and we carry this outlawry with us, like a bell we choose to ring rather than having it dragged from our hands. Right? Daenerys told Missandei. To Lady Sansa, to the lords of the North and Vale, to Lord Wyman, to the Prince of Dorne New-Minted, to Yara Greyjoy. Tell them I come not to take a throne from a dead woman, but to keep a living world from a dead man. She looked at Tyrion. And write to the city that blames you. Tell them what they must hear. What is that? Tyrion asked, and though he had jest enough, he preferred to be told truths that cut and cauterized. That you did not do this, she said. And that if you had, you would not have been so tidy. He laughed aloud then, delighted by the little cruelty because it was just. The wind took the sound and flung it against the stones. He said, I have never been tidy. Varys looked toward the east windows, where a flight of gulls made punctuation on a gray sentence. Euron will come, he said. He was always coming. This simply gives him a song to sing on the way. Let him, Daenerys said. We'll write our own. She looked up as the shadow of a dragon crossed the hall, slow and sovereign. Make ready. Yara read the stark writ with the wary satisfaction of a woman who has seen a storm she hates veer to smash someone else's house. The Iron Islands had no love for lions. They loved few things but the smell of their own salt and the hurt pride of their own kin. Exile, she mused, tasting the strange soft word like fresh fruit found on a rocky shore. Not hanging. She pressed the parchment flat on the driftwood table and put her knife through the lower margin. A lover's gesture that left the words unmarred. Send to the Mander, she told her shipmaster. We sail to Winterfell by way of White Harbor. The wolves want counsel that smells of brine. We'll bring it. She looked out over the iron sea where the wind had carved waves into mailed shoulders. And we'll patrol the gullet. If Euron wants a song, I'll teach him a dirge. The shipmaster grinned around two missing teeth. My queen. Not queen, Yara said sharply, because titles make men stupid and kin murderous. Captain will do. She touched the raven's leg before she sent it back. Quick, practical, as if cementing an agreement. Tell Daenerys we'll keep the eastern mouth quiet as a churchyard. They unveiled grief at noon, because noon is when men feel farthest from the dark and ready to be surprised by it. Qyburn's proclamation took the shape he had measured. The queen had died, no murder. Not yet. Too many kinds of men heard that word and reached automatically for fire. She had died in her chamber in her sleep. The first lie sewn neat as a hem. A state of mourning would be observed. The bells would ring at dusk because bells were obedient at dusk. The realm's enemies were many and treacherous. A bounty would be paid for the head or hand of Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf kinslayer wanted for regicide. Woodcuts multiplied like mushrooms after rain. They did not much resemble Tyrion. Likeness is a luxury when hatred is cheap. But they showed a small man with a malicious grin, and men are good at seeing what they are told to see. Women whispered that the queen had loved her child and would have given the city a golden heir. Qyburn let that rumor run. It made the grief useful. The Golden Company's officers pretended not to see the way their men rolled their eyes at morning orderlies in black who had become overnight authorities with no swords. Strickland drilled on the square because drilling looks like control from windows. The City Watch knocked cudgels on shields at corners because noise is often mistaken for power. By night, the taverns hummed with a different tune. "Bells at dusk for the lioness," said a man who'd once been a cell sale. "Bells at dawn for the city when it wakes up and checks its purse." Another man swore by the mother's milk that he'd seen a girl carrying a tray up to the keep who had not been there the day before and did not look like she understood how much those steps hate the feet that take them. He said it 3 times and liked the sound of it better each time. On the third night, Qyburn had Cersei laid out in a chamber of black stone hung with red. Not because he believed in rights, but because men do. He would borrow reverence if it got him an hour. The mountain stood at the head like a grotesque angel. In the candlelight, with the veil making her features into rumor, Cersei could have been any queen they'd ever had, asleep under the weight of her own crown. A small boy crept in to touch the hem of her gown the way superstitious hands steal a blessing. He scurried out again with a look that had found no god to answer it and was now considering different altars. Qyburn watched him go and made a note to speak with the watch about children. Children are holes in walls. They took the Gulltown road as Bran had counseled and found the Vale the way one finds a well. Treacherous if you lean wrong, life if you draw carefully. Royce's men did not try to like Jaime. They tried to measure him. He rode like a man who had known better horses and better saddles and had not told his back about the change, which endeared him to no one and earned him nothing but stiffness. On the second day, a shepherd stepped into the road and set his staff across it and said, "You are the lion." Though there was no sigil on Jaime's cloak nor gold on his bridle, he said it as one says, "You are the rain." "I was," Jaime replied. He held the shepherd's eyes until the man looked away, not from fear but from a reluctance to be the person faced with a story becoming something else. The shepherd moved his staff. The sheep, who could not distinguish between exile and outlawry, ate whatever grass permitted their tongues. At Iron Oaks they presented the writ to a lord with careful manners and an expression like a ledge. He read and read again. "This is a mercy," he said, like a man tasting boiled nettles and finding them edible if buttered, "but a mercy with teeth. Teeth are required," the White Harbor writer said, "when you mean to eat." "Good," the Lord said, and he sent for his steward to write a notice to be read in market squares from the Fingers to the Bloody Gate. The notice named exile and offered a list of acceptable new names for those who would lay down the old. Mother's house names, craftsmen's names, river names. It recommended mason and tar and stone. It did not recommend hill. The ledge-faced lord had read the world well enough to know a bastard's name is not a forgiveness. Jaime folded his cloak tighter against cold that did not live in the air. That night he dreamed of a white tower crumbling because a hand had failed it and woke with his stump aching as if a phantom limb had remembered another blade. "Do you mean to take a new name?" asked the Vale Knight, spur silent in frost. "I mean to take none," Jaime said. "When men call me, they can use what's left." The writ's words were a new wind. It came through market squares and down alleys and into kitchens where grease hissed in pans, and it found men and women who had thought the world was made only of the old seasons. "No bread to lions," the scribe read with solemn relish. "No shelter, no trade." He lifted his head, eyes bright with the delicious shock of carrying a change. "Any man who renounces." A pair of house men from a minor Lannister kin branch exchanged glances that had too much fear in them to be called hope and too much hope to be safe. One took his brother's sleeve and squeezed. "Stone," he whispered. "We were stone before we were lion. Father was quarry born." The other's mouth trembled, then firmed. "Wheat," he said. "I will not be hungry again because of a name." Across the square, a sign painter on a ladder lay a board across a carved lion that had once brought coin like a scent brings flies. He painted the wheat sheaf with careful strokes while his apprentice kept watch for men who might take offense in trade where no offense was meant. "New days," the painter said. "New signs." In a corner, A hedge knight with a lion worked into his pommel spat into his helmet and rubbed the spit in with his thumb as if polishing shame. He considered his sword, his life, the angle of the law, and put his pommel stone first into a brazier until the gold softened. He pressed it flat on a butcher's block while the butcher pretended not to see. "Sir," the butcher said when the knight lifted his eyes, "you'll want meat to go with that choice." "Will it work?" Jon asked Davos without looking at him, because looking at a man when asking him to predict the future is an unfair pressure even for a smuggler who had found his way through worse fogs. Davos blew into his hands and considered the dark as if it were a ledger he could balance with enough squinting. "Aye and no," he said. "Some will take the offer because they're tired, and tired men puzzle out how to live faster than proud ones. Some will laugh and keep their lions and find themselves unloved come winter. The trick will be whether we chase them in song or in silence." "In silence," Jon said. "If there's singing, it will be after." He stopped and set his gloved hands on the stone. The cold came through it like a slow thought. "Dany will come," he added, and the name on his mouth was both easy and heavy. "And with her, dragons." Davos's eyes went to the line of the north where a pale ribbon of light had begun to freckle the sky. Not an aurora, but something else. The old world making a comment. "I've never seen a dragon," he said. "I've seen a kraken, which is a dragon that learned to hold its breath. I expect a dragon is more to the purpose up here." Jon grunted. Ghost's ears pricked. The wolf raised his head into air that had acquired a taste of iron that was not from King's Landing. "They're coming," Jon said unnecessarily. He turned and looked down into the yard where men drilled with the tired ferocity of those who train for enemies they haven't yet seen and would prefer not to. "Then let's give them a place to arrive where they're welcome and not just tolerated," Davos said. "Unlike me when I first came north, gods bless you all." He jostled Jon's shoulder with a delicate disrespect that comes only from real respect. "You should sleep." "I should," Jon said, and did not. The sky made another small comment, like a whisper slung low across snow. He looked up into it as if a face would form. Bran's words about birds and lies made a shape beside Sansa's Rit's tidy teeth. He wondered whether Arya walked already inside the gates or whether she was still the wind under the hedge. He wondered how many men would change their names when the choice came down not to pride or shame but to hunger or no hunger. He wondered which of those men he would become if the wind turned. They came to Winterfell as if drawn by a magnet the heart tree had decided to become. The Vale sent men and bread and the severe courtesy of Bronze Yohn Royce, whose bronze plates caught the weak sun and made it look better than it was. Lord Glover muttered less when he saw wagons of flour. The Manderley men brought chests that did not hold gold but its longer-lived cousin. Paper, ink, wax, news, all the coin of order. They set up a table under a pine and sealed writs until their fingers were red from heat and wax. Happy in the way of bureaucrats who have been given a clean problem. Sansa greeted them with salt and bread because the old rites do not rot when winter comes. They preserve. She tied a red ribbon on a low branch of the heart tree. Not because the old gods asked it, but because sometimes you tell yourself a story with your hands so your heart knows what you mean. "Guessed right," she said aloud, to the air and the snow and the watchers unseen. "Guessed right for those who come to keep the living world living." Little Lord Robin, taller now and less sickly and still odd in a way that made Sansa ache for the things she could not make right in other people's blood, bowed with a formality that had been hammered into him like a straightening of steel. Royce's eyes approved, or more accurately, ceased to disapprove, which for him was as good as a grin. "Lady," he said, "my men will hold your roads while the great folk discuss great things." "The great thing," Sansa said mildly, "is not to starve." He snorted. "Aye." In the great hall, they spread maps Sansa trusted and maps she did not. The trusted ones had stains. Candle wax here, a bit of blood there, a tear where a child's hand once clutched. The untrusted ones smelled of fresh paint and certainty. "We will need both," she said, "and a man to redraw them when they disagree." Wolkan coughed. "A man with patient hands." "A woman will do," Sansa said. He smiled, delighted, and set to sharpening his quill. She came when the day had decided it would not improve. The snow was half rain, which is the sky's least committed form of cruelty. Arya walked into it as if it had been designed for her to test herself against and found it acceptable. The guard at the gate narrowed his eyes because narrowing is how men manage too many feelings at once. "Name?" he asked, because he was new and had not yet learned that names sometimes arrive after the person. "Arya," she said, and let the Stark on it ring like a bell that knew when to be heard. The guard unclenched from a question into a grin he half suppressed and then let go. "My lady, don't," she said, but not unkindly, and moved past him into the yard where her feet remembered the rhythm of stone under snow like the sound of a mother's lullaby. She saw the old burn marks and the new repairs. She saw the patched roof and the small sway in the gate where a hinge had been replaced, and she loved all of it with the kind of cold, complete love that needs no words. Sansa came across the yard with her cloak too thin for any queen who wanted to be comfortable and exactly right for a woman who wanted to prove she was made of her house's cloth. They stopped the right distance apart. Then Sansa stepped forward once more because she had learned that leadership is sometimes measured in the distance you close first. "Did it ring?" Arya asked. "When the bells didn't?" Sansa's laugh shook loose a warm place in the day. "Inside me?" "Yes." Faintly. "Inside them." She nodded toward the hall, where men were making decisions that would sit in their bellies like hot stones. "We're teaching them what to ring for." She put a hand up, and Arya put her brow to it like a child remembering how to be a child and a warrior who does not need witnesses for her surrender. "You did this," Sansa said softly. No pride in her tone because that would taste wrong, and no censure because that would break something not easily mended. "It has made a shape we can use." Arya's mouth twisted, a smile seen through snow. "I left without leaving a sign." "You are the sign," Sansa said, and Arya's eyes flickered like a banked coal blown on by a bellows no one could see. They went into the hall together. The heat there rose like applause. Men turned and tried to look at them as one thing and failed, because each Stark is a separate weather. Bran's eyes lifted, and whatever far place he had been walking emptied like a tide pooling back into rock. Jon crossed the floor as if he had been called by a word older than his name. Ghost's tail thumped once against a bench, a sound as old as Pack. "You smell like lavender," Jon said when they came within arm's reach, which would have puzzled a stranger and did not puzzle them at all. "An old woman's idea," Arya said. "It works." She let him fold her into an embrace that did not diminish either of them and then stepped back with a set to his mouth that meant other business. They had learned to measure their greetings so that watchers would not think love could be used against them. "Tell me," Sansa said, and Arya did, but not all at once. She gave the shape first, the corridor, the veil, the knot-ringed bells, and let the edges fill in like water claiming a bowl. The hall listened, and the words made a low, steady fire that warmed and warned. Far north of where men's little laws were making themselves brave, the world had declared a different law. It was simple and complete, cold. The Night King stood on an icy ridge that had not seen the ground in a century and watched his army move with the patience of glaciers. There was no drumming, no singing, no pride to be bled by hubris. He had been a man once, they said in the South, and then corrected themselves. He had been a story once. He was not a story now. He was the thing stories try to keep out of children's rooms. The trees cracked because life left sap unwillingly. The dead horse's eyes did not see. They recorded. A storm gathered but did not yet fall because even storms respect hierarchies older than themselves. Ravens turned and then chose south because crows are practical. Death is certain. Meals are not. In Winterfell's Godwood, Bran's breath slowed. There are ways to listen that require you to be less than yourself to be more. He followed a bird, then a wind, then the sound a blade of grass makes when it is covered by snow, then the memory of heat in a place where heat had forgotten itself. He returned with his mouth forming a word he did not say until he had shaped it into something someone else could hear. "Soon," he said, "tomorrow will be different from today in a way that matters." "That is what tomorrows are," Sansa said, because she would not let the room fall into fear as into a hole. "Different from today." "Not always," he said, But this one will. They came with wind first. The dragons wrote their names on the air with heat and thunder. And men ran out into the yard against their own better judgment to stare up into mouths older than their languages. The beasts spiraled once in a wide, cold circle that let every spear and eye have its look, then settled outside the walls in a rush of displaced snow that stung cheeks and made old men feel young enough to swear again. Daenerys descended the stair with the formality of a queen and the slight hurry of a woman who must cross to warmth before she can be a queen perfectly. Her cloak acknowledged winter without conceding it. White fur trimmed it like foam on a black rock. Jon bowed because he had learned to do that and because he wished to. Sansa inclined her head with the exact measure owed one sovereign who has come to treat with another on ground owned by neither and both. "Lady Sansa," Daenerys said, and the wind made the words look like silk on a line. "We came." "Queen Daenerys," Sansa returned, "you will have bread and salt of Winterfell, and words." Tyrion trailed with a face like a man attending his own libel and finding it entertaining in spots. He found Arya quickly because some part of him had been looking. He bowed. "My lady of no nonsense," he said softly. "My lord of too much," she returned, not unkindly. And they exchanged a glance that measured the distance between a rumor nailed to a market post and a living man carrying his name like a stranger he is deciding whether to invite in. In the hall, they spread more maps. The dragons huddled in the lee of the east wall and sent up occasional steam as if complaining to each other in an old language. The talk grew quick. Sansa laid out the exile writ. Daenerys set her palm upon it. Tyrion's signature took a second, then a third reading before he made it with a flourish and a small, painful exhale. It takes a moment to write away a house you have carried like a wound. "Tyrion," he said aloud as he finished, as if testing the taste. "Only that. If anyone adds more, I will charge for the privilege." Varys' silence was as valuable as ever. He stood where drafts found him and did not shiver. Grey Worm took a measure of the northern men and found them suitable for dying next to. Missandei warmed her hands at a brazier and made little notes in her neat script that would become orders, that would become movement, that would become survival. "Euron," Davos said. "We'll read this and decide it gives him sport." "Yara reads quicker," Daenerys said. "She will keep him busy." She looked to Jon. "And the dead." "Soon," he said, echoing Bran. "We must make the ground hard before they come." "Hard ground," she said, and her eyes, still the startling violet of old legend, flicked to the heart tree and then back. "I have burned ground. I have made it soft when it stood in my way. I will learn to make it hard." In places where the writ met flesh, it made little miracles that did not look like miracles to storytellers and therefore mattered more. At a watchtower south of the Trident, two boys with West Country vowels and fear in their hair knelt before a bent septon and said the words they had been given. It did not change the shape of their faces. It changed the way bread would be handed to them in winter. A hedge knight whose father had died bragging that he'd carried a lion's banner to the very doors of Riverrun took a file to a lion engraved on his shield and rubbed until the creature became a suggestion, and then a memory, and then nothing. His arm shook not with sorrow but with effort. He grinned when he was done and called for ale and the first honest fight he could find that had nothing to do with noble houses. The parchment with their new names lay on a table where a woman with ink-blackened thumbs affixed seals with a neatness that meant she respected what lists do to people. "Owen Stone," she read aloud, because saying a name makes it real. "Hob Wheat." The boys looked up as if someone had called them from inside a house for supper. Euron laughed when the raven came. He laughed when it left. He laughed in between, washing the sound down with wine that would have made better sense in a calmer throat. "Regicide," he said, tasting the word the way a madman tastes smoke. "I've been called worse by better men." He pinned the woodcut to a mast and saluted it. "If I find you, little lion, I'll cut you in half and send one half to the city and one half to the Dragon Queen and see which half enjoys it less." His fleet shifted as he thought. He pointed his spyglass toward Dragonstone and then, with the wanton joy of a man who lives in the moment between choice and consequence, turned it north. "Let them herd me into Yara's net," he purred. "We'll see who strangles." He thought of the queen who had died and did not veil his thoughts for reverence. He had liked her well enough as a prize and a platform. He did not miss her. He missed only the shape of himself made bigger by her reflection. "Point us at the gullet," he told his captain. "Then feint, then bite. I like bites." They built a rhythm in the days before the change. Writs went out. Men came in. Woodcutters cut. Smiths hammered. The kitchens breathed steam like a benevolent dragon. Jaime returned from the Vale with a report full of edges and a quiet surprise at his own survival. The riders with him had not grown fond, but they had grown less willing to kill him out of reflex. It is a small progress that matters. Sansa stood in the yard at dusk and accepted news like a queen accepts tribute, with steadiness that makes other people's fear shameful. Daenerys stood beside Jon when she could and apart when she judged it better. And between them there was the charged politeness of two fires learning how not to burn each other while warming a world that needed it. Tyrion learned the yard well enough to know which puddles were stable ice and which were treacherous. He taught Varys to avoid the latter, and Varys pretended he had not needed the lesson. Arya vanished and reappeared in the ways she has always had. Sometimes she stood in the godswood like a shadow thrown by a wolf. Sometimes she was on the wall practicing a flick and turn with the dagger that made Davos, watching, grateful to be on her side. Sometimes she sat with the girls from the kitchens and learned which of them were quick with knives and which with lies and which with both. She did not wear other faces often now. Winterfell liked hers. Bran watched the sky. It did not look different to anyone else. It looked like a lid. The raven came wrong. It came out of the north flying too low, its wings crusted with frost that had not melted as quickly as heat should command. It landed on the wall and fell sideways like a cup turned on its rim. Its message was no message. Its body was message enough. Bran lifted it with hands gentler than the world deserves and set it on the parapet and stroked its back until the sentence of its life ended with the soft period of breath. "They are a day," he said. He was not speaking to anyone, but the wall heard. The stone carried it downward to the yard, and the yard handed it to Sansa as she passed. And Sansa turned and put it into Daenerys' palm, and Daenerys set it into Jon's mouth, and Jon set it to the hall. One day, they moved with that word as their drum. Men stacked spears so they could be lifted in a breath. Women carried bundles of rags to the walls and a cask of oil to each rung of ladders. The dragons were restless and made small unhappy noises deep in their throats that vibrated the air as if a harp string had been plucked in the bones of the castle. Sansa went to the heart tree and pressed her hand to its flayed face and did not ask for victory. She asked for endurance. "Let me do this until it's done," she said. "If you can't give me that, give me the shape of doing it anyway." Arya stood where the wall met a stair and counted breaths to slow her heart to the rhythm of the way she fought best. She remembered the crack in the stone in the Red Keep and thought, there will be cracks here too. She decided to live through them. Jaime tightened a strap with his teeth and wished, without shame, for his hand. It did not come. He settled for what he had. His weight, his training, a willingness to be hit and get up again and again until the ground learned to stop throwing him down. Daenerys walked to the dragons and laid her palm on a flank that rose like a hill breathing. "We will not burn what we mean to save," she said into the scales, and the dragon's eye, vast, alien, and fond, regarded her as if to say, "We will do as you tell us and as we are." Jon found Ghost and sank his hand into Winter. "Stay near Sansa," he said. The wolf snorted. "You won't," Jon said, "but I have to say it." Davos counted casks and ladders and men who could carry both and shook his head because numbers do not change for the pleading. "All right," he told them, as if they were apprentices who needed scolding to keep them from drowning. "All right, you bastards." Bran closed his eyes and found a bird still able to rise. He saw white walking, and blue eyes like winter made into a gaze, and the impossible patience of something that does not know boredom. He returned to his body and set his hand on the wood of his chair as if it could tell him how to be a tree.